Hello and welcome to Weekly News Highlights. Let's begin with the keywords that made headlines this week. Government ministries are entering the second week of policy progress briefings, now being broadcast live for the first time. President Lee Jae-myung says the shift may cause friction, but insists greater transparency will ultimately strengthen public trust. A 6-month special prosecutor's investigation into former President Yoon Suk-yeol's martial law declaration has come to an end. The findings lay out when preparations for martial law began and how far the plan went. The government is preparing to inject 30 trillion won, about $20 billion into South Korea's future growth engines next year as part of a broader push to enhance industrial competitiveness. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung held summit talks with his Laotian counterpart, with the two leaders pledging to pursue mutually beneficial and future-oriented cooperation. They agreed to form a comprehensive partnership. Our senior presidential office correspondent Yoon Jung-min has more.
Celebrating 30 years of restored diplomatic relations, South Korea and Laos have agreed to upgrade their ties to a comprehensive partnership. This as President Lee Jae-myung hosted Laotian President Thongloun Sisoulith at his office on Monday, having invited him for a 2-day official visit.
풍부한 천연 자원을 보유하고 있는 라오스는 핵심 광물 공급망 구축을 위한 중요한 파트너 국가이기도 합니다.
Laos aims to transform itself as a regional hub for transportation and logistics, and President Lee expressed hopes to work together as a partner along the way, hoping for a mutually beneficial and future-oriented partnership that can actually benefit the people.
It is an opportunity to reaffirm the success that the two countries have achieved by cooperating in various fields over the past 30 years.
Since restoring relations in 1995 that were severed following the rise of communist governments in Southeast Asia in the 1970s, the trade volume between South Korea and Laos has grown 20-fold, on top of people-to-people exchanges, hitting a record high last year.
한국은 라오스국 입장에서 보면 3대 개발 협력 파트너이고 5위의 투자 국가이며 또 라오스는 한 아세안, 한 메콩 협력의 매우 중요한 파트너 국가입니다.
Laos is still not able to graduate from the least developed country status. I ask for your support in this matter.
The focus was also on the two countries bolstering coordination to combat transnational crimes, such as online scams. Following the talks, the two sides signed law enforcement and extradition treaties and renewed an MOU related to the employment permit system. The leaders also agreed to establish a hotline channel between relevant authorities to protect the safety of the Korean people in Laos. Also discussed was resolving North Korea nuclear issues, according to presidential spokesperson Kang Yoo-jung, adding that the Laotian president highly appreciated the Korean government's peace efforts and promised to continue making constructive efforts. The summit concluded with a luncheon hosted by the South Korean first couple. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
The Lee Jae-myung administration is continuing its series of live policy briefings. Earlier this week, the Health Ministry and the Ministry of Food and Drug Safety held their sessions, followed by briefings from the Culture Ministry and the Anti-Corruption and Civil Rights Commission. President Lee said the decision to air the briefings live reflects his commitment to transparency despite mixed reactions. Our top office correspondent Song Yoo-jin has the details.
As government ministries and agencies enter the second week of policy progress briefings now being broadcast live for the first time, President Lee Jae-myung says change may bring friction, but it is worth the effort.
공무원들 입장에서는 새로운 방식에 익숙하지 않을 수도 있고 또 예년과 같은 형태로 업무 보고하면 아마 편할 수도 있을 겁니다. 그런데 정책 과정이 투명하게 검증돼야 되고 또 그 과정에서 집단 지성이 모여야 정책에 대한 신뢰도도.
Lee made the remarks at Tuesday's cabinet meeting as opinions remain divided over the live broadcast. Supporters say the move strengthens transparency and the public's right to know, while critics argue it risks turning policy reviews into excessive discipline or public shaming. Appearing to address those concerns, the president said the new format reflects his administration's principle that the government exists to serve the people.
국정이 이 국정의 주체인 국민들에게 투명하게 공개돼야 국민 중심 국정 운영이라는 게 말에 그치지 않고 제대로 될 수가 있습니다.
On Tuesday, the Culture Ministry held its policy briefing alongside the Ministries of Health and Food and Drug Safety. President Lee stressed the importance of the arm's length principle in the government's relationship with the arts.
일부는 또 각광을 받긴 하지만 압도적 다수는 그러지 못한 게 또 현실입니다. 개인적인 삶으로 끝나는 게 아니고 공공 영역에 영향을 미치고 사람들의 삶을 풍요롭게 풍족하게 만들죠. 그리고 세세하게 정말 구석구석 지원하되 간섭하지 않으면서도.
In line with this, the Culture Ministry plans to strengthen livelihood support measures for artists, such as offering low-interest, small loans. 송유진, Arirang News.
President Lee Jae-myung was briefed Wednesday by his top economic and trade officials as the government continued its policy briefings for 2026. Talks focus on navigating a rapidly shifting global economic order. Our correspondent Yoon Jung-min reports.
Diversifying export markets was among the key items during Wednesday's policy briefing by the Ministries of Trade and SMEs in the face of a fast-changing international order.
우리가 미국, 중국 의존도가 너무 높다 보니까 그게 너무 많이 휘둘리죠. 제가 정상회의를 몇 군데 가면서 느낀 건데 시장의 잠재력들이 상당히 있겠다 싶은 곳이 많아요.
I think it is important, above all, to manage summit deliverables to yield tangible outcomes. I also believe our ODAE projects can play a role in the emerging markets.
The president instructed his officials to make the first move to make inroads into new markets and seek out ODA projects that can actually benefit recipients in terms of industrial development, rather than focusing on donation or charity. When it comes to market competition, he called for the need to allow collective bargaining power for smaller firms and franchises, currently banned by law, when negotiating with large conglomerates.
경쟁이라는 이름으로 사실은 약육강식이 이루어지고 이게 결국 비효율이나 아니면 시장 실패를 유인하잖아요. 그러니까 힘의 균형을 잡아주는 게 정말로 중요하다. 그게 바로 정부의 역할이죠.
He also instructed the officials to create an environment where startups and entrepreneurs are not afraid of failure by providing them with incentives for trial and error for a second chance.
실패 경험을 자산으로 인정해주고 거기에 오히려 더 기회를 더 북돋아 주어야 과감하게 창업에 도전할 수 있겠죠.
When it comes to technology and information theft, President Lee ordered officials to impose heavy penalty fines for eradication. For trade and industry, the policy focus of 2026 will be achieving balanced regional growth, a transition to AI, and finding U.S. investment projects that are commercially reasonable while implementing the U.S. trade deal. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
This Monday, the 6-month investigation into former President Yoon Suk-yeol's alleged insurrection case came to an end. The special prosecutors reshaped the narrative around last year's martial law declaration as it defined key elements such as the preparation process and what it aimed to achieve. For more, we're joined by our political correspondent Moon Hae-ryun. Welcome, Hae-ryun.
It's good to be here, Sujin.
So to start us off, Hae-ryun, what did the investigators uncover about when and why the preparations for the martial law actually began?
So the special prosecutor's conclusion directly contradicts the former president's explanation. Investigators say preparations for martial law began before October 2023, well ahead of the April 2024 general election former President Yoon Suk-yeol cited as the trigger. Rather than an emergency response, the probe described the declaration as a long-term political decision, discussed and developed over more than a year. According to the findings, Yoon referenced emergency presidential authority soon after taking office and by late 2022 spoke to allies about using extraordinary powers. Language investigators say points to intent rather than impulse. By mid to late 2023, preparations had intensified, with key military appointments and discussions over timing. At that point, prosecutors say martial law was no longer hypothetical, but an operational plan detached from any single event.
Then how extensive was this plan, and what did the investigation reveal about the scope of power that the former president and his allies were prepared to seize?
So the prosecutor describes a plan that goes far beyond just suspending the civil order. Investigators say it involved using the military to paralyze the National Assembly, halt political activity, and neutralize opposition forces. Evidence recovered during the probe outlines plans to block parliamentary funding, occupy government institutions, and create an emergency legislative body to replace the assembly. Arrest and detention lists were also confirmed, including sitting lawmakers and election officials, with intelligence officers tasked with detaining election staff under claims of fraud. Prosecutors say this amounted to an attempt to seize all three branches of power, executive, legislative, and judicial, creating what they describe as an unchecked authoritarian system. In that context, the case is framed not only as a technical breach of procedure, but as an attempt to overturn the constitutional order, a question now moving to the courts.
Whether this constitutes insurrection remains an open question, but the special prosecutor's findings appear to proceed on the premise that it does, with the final determination left to the courts.
All right, so what lines did the investigation draw in terms of accountability, and what unanswered political questions does this case leave behind?
So the special prosecutor says that the investigation has drawn some clear legal lines, even as broader political questions remain unresolved. On the judicial and legislative fronts, the probe found no evidence of institutional involvement. Allegations that the Supreme Court or its leadership had prior knowledge of the martial law declaration were dismissed, as were claims that lawmakers obstructed the National Assembly's law to lift it. At the center of power, however, responsibility was sharply defined. Over 6 months, investigators reviewed 249 cases, indicted 27 people, and detained 3 key figures, including former President Yoon. 8 former cabinet ministers and 9 presidential office officials were also sent to trial, extending accountability to senior aides. Legal experts say the true impact of the probe goes beyond the former president himself.
The key achievement of the special prosecutor's investigation lies in the indictments and first instance trials, which for the first time examined the alleged illegality of cabinet ministers failing to stop the president's dangerous use of emergency powers.
The probe also examines the political context, identifying power retention as the core motive, while noting legal risks facing Yoon and the former First Lady as contributing factors rather than separate findings. The findings point to a familiar conclusion. The legal process may be nearing completion, but political responsibility remains unsettled, underscoring the need for institutional reforms as the debate continues.
We'll be closely following what happens next, both in the courtroom and on the political front. Thank you so much for your report today, Arirang.
Thank you for having me.
South Korea and the United Kingdom have finalized an upgraded free trade agreement, concluding 2 years of negotiations aimed at strengthening bilateral economic ties. Park Jin has the details.
South Korea and the United Kingdom have agreed to sign an improved free trade agreement that could benefit each country's trade terms. The deal was concluded after 5 trade ministers' meetings over the past 2 years. Monday's deal in London significantly eases rules of origin for key Korean exports. What stands out is that for automobiles, which account for 36% of South Korea's exports to the UK last year, worth $2.39 billion, The local value-added requirement for tariff exemptions was lowered from 55% to 25% under the revised negotiations. This is expected to boost price competitiveness for electric vehicles, which often rely on imported raw materials for batteries. Barriers have also been lowered for K-food and cosmetics, allowing duty-free status even when processed with imported ingredients. Additionally, the agreement opens the British high-speed rail market to Korean firms and establishes a new framework for cooperation in AI and supply chain security. United Kingdom Prime Minister Keir Starmer welcomed the deal, saying it was a huge win for British business. British Trade Minister Chris Bryant also added that the improvements would give cast iron protections to our key industries to speed up economic growth as part of our plan for change. Before the finalization of the upgrades, the original FTA deal between the two countries was set to expire in January. The BBC claimed that the upgraded FTA secures tariff-free access for 98% of UK goods and will protect 2 billion British pounds of UK exports from an increase in tariffs. Meanwhile, South Korea is the UK's 25th largest trading partner according to the UK Department for Business and Trade. South Korea's Trade Minister Yo Han-gu said in the interview with the BBC that the two countries' economies can win together through cooperation, adding Britain can serve as a gateway for South Korea in its trade with Europe, while South Korea can serve as a gateway to Asia for British companies. 박준환, 아리랑 뉴스.
South Korean companies saw an increase in total sales last year, according to a new government survey, with the robust semiconductor sector leading the rise. An Sung-jin has the details.
Earnings for South Korean companies in 2024 increased on the back of a semiconductor boom. According to the Data Ministry on Tuesday, total sales from the 2024 survey of business activities, made up of nearly 15,000 companies and excludes the financial and insurance sector, reached 3,371.1 trillion won, or 2.28 trillion US dollars. That's a 5.2% increase from the year before. In particular, net profit before corporate tax surged by 20.6%. An official from the Data Ministry said that the chip industry, which suffered a downturn in 2023, played a key role in pushing the figure before corporate tax amid the global AI boom. The Trade Ministry had earlier stated that South Korea's semiconductor exports totaled $141.9 billion last year, the highest level on record. Average sales per company also rose. By industry, sales saw a hike in scientific and technical services, transportation and warehousing, and accommodation and food services. Meanwhile, sales declined in construction and the electricity and gas supply sector. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
The Lee Jae-myung administration plans to deploy a fifth of its National Growth Fund next year as part of a push to accelerate economic expansion and long-term prosperity. Our Kim Do-yeon has details.
South Korea is set to spend 30 trillion won, or around 20.4 billion US dollars, of its 150 trillion won National Growth Fund next year. Deputy Prime Minister Koo Yoon-chul convened the Industrial Competitiveness Enhancement Ministers meeting on Tuesday, which also served as the Growth Strategy Task Force. During this session, policymakers finalized the operational roadmap for the National Growth Fund. During the meeting, it was confirmed that next year's investment will be done through a public-private matching structure. The government is putting up 15 trillion won through its Advanced Strategic Industry Fund. The capital serves as a primer to attract another 15 trillion won in matching investments from private financial institutions and banks. The task force also designated specific targets for where this investment will be focused. 6 trillion won will be funneled into artificial intelligence. The semiconductor ecosystem will receive 4.2 trillion won, and 3.1 trillion won is set aside for future mobility. But capital investment is only half the battle. The government is also moving to secure the physical infrastructure of trade. Facing rising uncertainties like U.S. tariff changes and supply chain fragmentation, the task force approved the Global Logistics Supply Chain Hub strategy. The specific goal is to secure 40 overseas logistics centers and 10 major port terminals by 2030. The government also plans to raise approximately 600 billion won through a citizen participation fund. This allows the general public to invest directly in these strategic industries to share the fruits of growth. To encourage participation, the government plans to offer tax benefits and provide subordinated financial backing to reduce investment risks for the public. Deputy Prime Minister Koo emphasized that the current administration views the next 5 years as a critical golden time for the economy. He pledged that the task force will continue to oversee these investments to ensure tangible growth. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
South Korea recorded a historic high in parental leave last year, with more than 200,000 people taking time off to care for their children, including a record number of fathers. Park Jun-an reports.
South Korea saw a record number of parental leave takers in 2024, surpassing 206,000 for the first time since such data was first recorded in 2010. According to data released by the Ministry of Data and Statistics on Wednesday, the total number of people taking parental leave reached just over 26,000, up 4% from 2023. This rebound follows a slight dip in 2023 amid low birth rates and coincides with a modest increase in the fertility rate from 0.72 to 0.75, the first rise in 9 years. And a notable shift is emerging toward shared parenting. The number of fathers taking parental leave surged 18.3% to over 60,000 fathers, accounting for more than 29% of the total, the highest proportion ever. For the first time, more than 10% of fathers of newborns took parental leave, meaning roughly 1 in 10 eligible fathers of 2024 newborns used leave in the year their child was born. Overall, parental leave usage for newborns last year hit a record 34.7%. However, over 60% of parental leave takers work at large companies with over 300 employees, where usage rates are higher. In small firms with fewer than 5 workers, only 41% of eligible mothers took leave, raising questions about why parents at smaller businesses often make less use of parental leave.
Small businesses are already short-staffed and often cannot find replacement workers. When employees take extended leave, employers still bear wage costs, adding financial pressure. While parental leave supports child-rearing, it also widens the gap between workplaces, and this issue deserves serious discussion.
The general trend of more fathers taking parental leave reflects the government's efforts to combat low birth rates by encouraging paternal involvement in childcare, marking progress toward more balanced family responsibilities. Park Jun-an, Arirang News.
South Korea's central bank expects inflation to rise at a slower pace next year, but warns that continued weakness in the won could push prices higher. Our Kim Do-yeon reports.
The Bank of Korea projects consumer prices to increase by 2.1% next year, but highlighted a recent rebound in prices due to exchange rate volatility. Governor Lee Chang-yong stated on Wednesday during an inflation briefing that if the exchange rate continues at its current high level, inflation is likely to rise higher than the current forecast.
Several factors are compounding to drive up recent consumer inflation. Unlike previous years, unfavorable weather has kept agricultural and fishery prices high, while the rising exchange rate has kept oil prices strong.
Taking a closer look at this year's inflation trend, consumer price inflation started the year hovering above the 2% range. Inflation slowed by the summer, hitting a yearly low of 1.7% in August due to temporary factors. However, inflation started creeping up again in the fourth quarter, with prices in both October and November 2.4% higher than the year before. Despite this recent volatility, the central bank is maintaining its baseline forecast for next year at 2.1%. The BOK expects stability because the current economic recovery is led by the IT sector, which tends to have a limited immediate impact on general consumer prices. However, the exchange rate remains a critical variable. The bank's analysis shows that if the $1 rate persists around the 1,471 level, inflation could exceed its forecast and rise to the mid-2% range. Governor Lee also took the opportunity to address the weakness of the Korean won in detail. He clarified that the current situation is not a financial crisis in the traditional sense where banks fail or the nation faces default. However, he admitted that the continued weakness of the won is deeply concerning due to its social impact.
I completely disagree that this is a traditional financial crisis, but in other respects, I would call it a crisis, and I am deeply worried. The current exchange rate has a significant impact on inflation. Furthermore, when rates rise like this, the divide between those who benefit and those who lose becomes extreme.
Governor Lee emphasized that considering this potential for growth polarization, the current exchange rate level is far from reassuring and requires vigilance to prevent social discord. Kim Do-hee, Arirang News.
The U.S. Army in Korea has introduced an autonomous dining facility, the first of its kind at any U.S. military base worldwide, using robotic systems to prepare meals for soldiers at Camp Walker in Daegu. Our defense correspondent Kim Bo-gong shows us how it works.
This is Market 19, a dining facility at the Camp Walker U.S. Army base in Daegu City. But you don't see any big batches or huge pots of food. Instead, there is a state-of-the-art machine that provides tasty dishes on demand when soldiers order them through the touchscreen. In just 5 minutes, a robot turns the ingredients into a dish with toppings on it. Managing the cafeteria has become much easier, with a screen just telling people what to do. So what is this screen all about?
Sure, so this is our resupply screen. It helps us to know when ingredients are running low and when to restock them.
So basically we need to restock this A1 ingredient.
Broccoli is coming soon, and then also soon pork sausage slices.
The system, the first of its kind at any U.S. military base in the world, helps improve readiness by allowing soldiers to get meals whenever they want.
We basically took the hours of the typical cafeteria and we expanded it. So we're open from 0 to 7:30 to 7 p.m. every day. Gives the soldiers a healthy option all day for them to come in and grab a healthy meal.
Around 10 dishes are on the menu, including Korean dishes added with Katyusha soldiers, the Korean augmentation to the United States Army in mind. But they are not just popular with Katyusha, but with all the soldiers. The most popular dish, chosen by around 70% of the soldiers, is pork 제육덮밥, with plenty of vegetables and chopped scallions on top. Robot-made dishes are not only providing soldiers with healthy, hearty meals, but also giving cooks more time to develop new ideas and experiment beyond standard recipes.
But with this machine creating those same formulas for us, we can actually use that extra time given to us to hone our craft more. So you have a cook cooking in a regular dining facility who's doing everything by the standard, but people here, we would work to go beyond that standard and set a new standard for the future of nutrition and the military.
A hearty, well-prepared meal powers soldiers' strength and readiness. Following a 6-month trial period, the USFK will decide whether to expand it to other bases. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News, Daegu.
That brings us to the end of Weekly News Highlights. Thank you for watching and enjoy the rest of your weekend.